The winter wind cut like a knife across the Arizona territory of 1882. Snow blanketed the rugged landscape, transforming the wilderness into a silent, white expanse, broken only by the dark outline of pines and the occasional wisp of smoke from Mason Reed's solitary cabin. Mason stood at his cabin's threshold, Winchester Model 1873 cradled in calloused hands, the metal cold against his skin. The rifle bore notches along its stock, 13 of them, not for vanity, but remembrance. Each mark represented a life taken during the bloodbath at Spotsylvania Courthouse, where he'd watched good men die in mud turn crimson. His eyes, sharp despite his 38 years, caught movement at the tree line. Through the falling snow, a gray shape darted, a wolf, its lean body betraying winter's hunger. But beyond the predator lay something else, a dark form crumpled in the snow. The wolf circled, growing bolder with each pass. Mason raised the Winchester to his shoulder, peering through the scope. His breath steadied as his finger found the trigger. The shot cracked through the frozen air, echoing across the valley. The wolf yelped, staggered, then collapsed, crimson staining the pristine white. "Not my concern," Mason muttered, lowering the rifle. He'd come to this desolate stretch of wilderness for solitude, to escape memories of battle and the graves of his wife and infant son, victims of fever that swept through their settlement 5 years past. But as he turned toward his door, the dark shape moved, an unmistakably human hand reaching skyward, fingers trembling against the white. Something pulled at him, a sense of duty that years of isolation hadn't erased. Cursing under his breath, Mason trudged through knee-deep snow. The cold bit through his coat as he approached, rifle ready. Military instinct never truly faded. The woman lay face down, blood darkening the snow around her. Apache, he realized immediately, noting the intricate beadwork on her torn deerskin dress. Rope burns encircled her wrists, dried blood matted her long black hair, and lash marks scored her exposed back. Someone had worked her over methodically, then left her to die. Mason scanned the tree line, every sense alert. Whoever had done this might still be watching. After a moment's hesitation, he slung his rifle and lifted her from the snow. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, but a faint pulse still fluttered at her throat like a trapped bird. Inside the cabin, Mason laid her on his bed and stoked the fire to blazing. Years of battlefield medicine guided his hands as he cleaned her wounds with whiskey and bound the worst of them with strips torn from a clean shirt. Each mark told a story of calculated cruelty. This wasn't the chaotic violence of battle, but deliberate torture. He dozed fitfully in his chair, Winchester across his lap, jerking awake at the smallest sound. Dawn was breaking when the woman suddenly bolted upright, eyes wild with terror and determination. In one fluid motion, she snatched Mason's skinning knife from the table and lunged. Mason caught her wrist mid-strike, disarmed her with a practiced twist, and pinned her arms. Their faces inches apart, he felt her breath, rapid and warm. "Easy," he said, voice rough from disuse. "If I wanted you dead, I'd have left you for the wolves." She fought for just a moment more before going still, dark eyes studying him with calculated precision, assessing threat and opportunity. Mason released her slowly, keeping the knife beyond reach. "Water," he said, gesturing to a cup on the table. She took it cautiously, drinking in small, measured sips, never taking her eyes from him, the watchfulness of prey that knows it might become prey again at any moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but her English precise, each word carefully formed. "You saved my life." She touched the bandage at her forehead, wincing slightly. "By the blood law of my people, you have made a choice you do not understand." Mason frowned, leaning against the rough-hewn table. "What choice?" "When a white man saves Apache blood, he must become blood brother or blood enemy." Her expression remained impassive. "There is no middle path. Mason almost laughed but caught himself. He'd seen enough of tribal customs during his scouting days to know they carried weight beyond his understanding. "Lady, I don't subscribe to your laws," he said, checking his revolver's chamber before returning it to its holster. "I just kept you from being wolf food." "The law exists whether you believe or not," she replied simply. "I am Tahi, daughter of Chief Nantai of the Chiricahua, and you have until sunrise tomorrow to decide." Mason would have argued further, but movement outside caught his eye. Through the frosted window, he spotted tracks in the snow. Not animal, but men. At least three circling the cabin with practiced precision. "You expecting company?" he asked, already moving to the gun rack where three rifles stood ready. Tahi's face hardened, fear replaced by cold hatred. "Lieutenant Franklin Bishop, he seeks the sacred weapons cache of my people. He tortured me for its location." Mason checked his Colt, then loaded shells into his Winchester, movements automatic from years of practice. "How many men?" "5, all killers who wear the white man's uniform, but follow no law but gold." Mason glanced at the knife she tried to kill him with, then at the woman on his bed. He'd seen enough of war to recognize the difference between soldiers and butchers. The rope burns on her wrist told him everything about Bishop's methods. "Nobody comes onto my land and makes demands," he said flatly, positioning himself by the window. Through the glass, he spotted them now, 5 riders approaching, military coats but no official insignia, mercenaries using army credentials, the worst kind. "Can you shoot?" he asked. Tahi nodded once, eyes glinting. "Better than most men." Mason tossed her his backup revolver, a worn Remington. "Bishop wants you alive. That's our advantage." A voice called from outside, carrying on the cold air. "Mason Reed, I know you're in there. I just want the Apache woman. Give her up, and we'll ride away peaceful-like." Mason positioned himself by the window, angle calculated to remain unseen. "You've got the wrong cabin, stranger. No Apache here. Just me and enough ammunition to make this an expensive conversation for you." A laugh drifted through the frozen air. "Mason Reed, 7th Cavalry, scout and marksman. We served together at Yellow Creek. I know it's you." Mason tensed. The voice crystallized in his memory. Franklin Bishop, once a promising young officer before something broke inside him during the Apache campaigns. A man who'd earned the nickname Butcher of Blackwater for a raid that left 37 Apache dead, most women and children. "Bishop," Mason called back, voice steady. "Heard you'd left the Army. Found better employers. Now about that Apache girl, don't know what you're talking about." "She's the only one who knows where her tribe hid the weapons cache," Bishop's voice hardened. "Winchester rifles, Colt revolvers, even a Gatling gun they stole from the 5th Cavalry. My employer wants those weapons before the Apache can use them." Mason glanced at Tahi, who stared back with unflinching eyes. "Last chance, Mason," Bishop called. "Hand her over. I'll pay you $50. "That's generous for an Indian." Mason's finger settled on the trigger, finding its natural resting place. "How about you ride away while you still can?" A moment of tense silence, then, "Burn it." The first shot shattered the window, showering Mason with glass. He returned fire with methodical precision, the Winchester's report thundering in the small cabin. His first shot caught one of Bishop's men square in the chest. The mercenary dropped from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. "Get down!" Mason yelled to Tahi as flaming arrows arced toward the cabin roof. The dry pine timbers, seasoned by years of summer heat, caught quickly. Mason fired through the broken window, each shot deliberate. A second man fell, clutching his throat, scarlet spraying across the snow. 4 left. The heat intensified as flames spread across the ceiling, smoke filling the small cabin in choking waves. "This way," Mason said, pulling back a bearskin rug to reveal a trap door. Underground passage leads to the creek. Tahi looked surprised, a hint of admiration crossing her face. You prepared well. Man doesn't survive Spotsylvania without learning to have an escape route, Mason replied, lifting the heavy wooden door. The memory of men trapped in burning buildings during the war still haunted his dreams. They dropped into the narrow tunnel as the cabin roof collapsed above them. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for Mason's shoulders, and pitch black. He led by feel, one hand on the earthen wall, the other holding his Colt. Behind them, voices shouted as Bishop's men discovered the tunnel. A shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the dirt wall inches from Mason's head. Keep moving, he hissed, feeling warm blood running down his arm where a bullet had grazed him. The tunnel ended at a rock face overlooking the creek 15 feet below. Without hesitation, Mason grabbed Tay and jumped. The icy water stole his breath, but he surfaced quickly, pulling Tay toward the far bank. They scrambled up the embankment as bullets peppered the water behind them. The forest, he gasped, water streaming from his clothes, already turning to ice in the bitter cold. We can lose them in the pines. For 3 days they moved through the wilderness, avoiding trails, crossing streams to mask their scent. Mason taught Tahi how to walk without leaving tracks in snow, while she showed him which pine bark could be chewed to stave off hunger. His wound festered despite her application of pine resin, and by the third morning, fever had set in. He stumbled, falling to his knees in a small clearing, the world spinning around him. Can't stop, he muttered, but his body refused to obey. Tahi knelt beside him, examining the wound with knowing hands. Without a word, she gathered plants from the forest floor, leaves of mountain mint, juniper berries, and a bulbous root Mason didn't recognize. She chewed them into a paste and packed it into his wound. The pain was excruciating. Mason bit down on a leather strap and endured, memories of battlefield surgeries flashing behind his eyes. Men holding comrades down as surgeons sawed through limbs without morphine. Why help me? He asked when the pain subsided enough for speech. You could run. Bishop wants you, not me. Ty's dark eyes studied him, unreadable. Blood law? When I said you must choose to be blood brother or blood enemy, you chose when you fought Bishop instead of surrendering me. Wasn't much of a choice, Mason grunted, his head throbbing with fever. All life is choice, she said simply. Sleep now. The fever will break, or it will kill you. Mason drifted into unconsciousness, haunted by dreams of Spotsylvania. The screams, the blood, the faces of men he'd killed, and men who died beside him. His wife's face as fever took her, his son's small hand growing cold in his. When he woke, stars shone overhead in a black velvet sky. The fever had broken. Tahi sat nearby, alert, his Colt revolver in her hand. Tell me about these weapons Bishop wants so badly, Mason said, his voice rough from thirst. Not just weapons, Tahi replied, passing him a water skin. My people control land that holds gold. Many gold mines. Bishop works for mining interests in San Francisco. The weapons are his excuse. He plans to arm his men, attack our village, and claim we fired first. Mason nodded grimly. He'd seen it before. Massacres justified by false claims of aggression, treaties broken for mineral rights, tribes relocated from land that suddenly held value to white men. There's a trading post 2 days east, he said, struggling to his feet. Man named Burke runs it. Ex-cavalry, but decent. We need supplies, and I need to know how many men Bishop has now. The journey to Copper Canyon trading post took them across open country, vulnerable terrain where they were exposed against the snow. Twice they spotted riders in the distance, Comancheros, bounty hunters paid by the scalp. Mason and Tahi moved only at night, hiding during daylight hours, sharing body heat beneath a lean-to of pine branches. The trading post appeared as a cluster of weathered buildings in a narrow canyon. Smoke rose from the chimney of the largest structure, a combination general store and saloon. 3 horses stood hitched outside, their breath clouding in the cold air. "Stay behind me," Mason instructed as they approached. "Let me do the talking." Inside, conversation died as they entered. A dozen men turned to stare. Trappers, miners, drifters with hard eyes and harder expressions. Their gazes lingered on Tahi, hostility evident in narrowed eyes and hands that drifted to weapons. "Mason Reed," said a gruff voice. "Thought you were dead." Sergeant William Burke stood behind the bar, gray-bearded but still powerfully built. His left sleeve was pinned empty where an Apache arrow had taken his arm years before. "Not yet," Mason replied, eyes scanning the room, identifying threats and exits. "Need supplies and information." Burke nodded toward a back room. "Best we talk private." Once away from prying eyes, Burke poured whiskey for them both. The amber liquid caught the light from the single window as he handed a glass to Mason. "You're traveling with dangerous company," Burke said, eyeing Tahi. "That's Chief Nantai's daughter. There's a bounty on her, dead or alive. $200. Bishop's work?" Burke nodded. "He's got 20 men now. Ex-army mostly, but some Comancheros too. Mean bastards who'd kill their own mothers for a gold eagle." "He's planning to hit the Apache village," Mason said. "Claims they have a weapons cache." "They do," Burke confirmed, draining his glass. "Enough firepower to hold off the U.S. cavalry if it came to it. Been collecting it for years, piece by piece. That's why the government's turning a blind eye to Bishop. They're hoping he'll do their dirty work." Tahi spoke for the first time since entering the trading post. "My people will die without those weapons." Burke studied her, his expression softening slightly. "Why's Bishop so certain you know where they're hidden? Apache have many secrets." "Because I am the keeper of the key," she replied, lifting her chin with pride. "Only the chief's daughter can unlock the sacred cave. It requires blood of our bloodline and words passed down from mother to daughter since the time of the first people." The door burst open with a crash. 4 men entered, guns drawn. Their leader, a scarred Mexican with a necklace of human ears, grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Senor Burke, you did not tell us you had such special guests." His eyes fixed on Tahi. "La Mujer Apache. Bishop pays well for her." Mason's hand moved toward his Colt, but Burke was faster. The shotgun under the counter roared, blasting the leader backward through the doorway in a spray of blood and bone. "Back door!" Burke shouted, firing again as Mason grabbed Tahi and ran. They burst into the alley behind the trading post just as gunfire erupted inside. Burke emerged moments later, bleeding from a ragged wound in his shoulder, his face pale beneath his beard. "My wagon!" he gasped, clutching his shotgun. "Behind the stable." They reached the wagon as riders appeared at both ends of the alley. Mason fired, dropping one, while Burke's shotgun cleared a path. They piled into the wagon, and Mason whipped the horses into motion. Bullets splintered wood around them as they thundered out of the canyon. Burke slumped against the sideboard, blood soaking his shirt. "How bad?" Mason asked, eyes on the trail ahead. "Had worse," Burke grunted. "But I'm too old for this shit." They drove hard until nightfall, finally stopping in a sheltered ravine. Tahi tended Burke's wound while Mason kept watch, the Winchester across his knees. "Why help us?" Tahi asked Burke as she bandaged his shoulder with strips torn from her own dress. "Your people and mine have been enemies." Burke's weathered face showed a hint of smile beneath the pain. 20 years ago, I'd have shot you myself. But I've seen too many innocent people die for someone else's gold. Gets a man thinking about which side of heaven he wants to stand on. Later, as Burke slept, Mason and Tahi sat by the small fire, flames casting their faces in golden shadow. "You know what you're asking me to do?" Mason said quietly. "Helping your people means fighting against my own. If we survive, I'll be branded a traitor." Ty's gaze held his, unflinching. What do you fight for, Mason Reed? Not your government, not yourself. Why fight at all? The question hit him like a physical blow. Why, indeed? Since losing his family, he'd been simply existing, not living, haunted by ghosts of the past. There's a ceremony, Tahi said, her voice softening, to make blood brotherhood official. It cannot be undone. My people believe it binds souls beyond death. Mason studied her face in the firelight, seeing beyond her beauty to the strength beneath. What does it involve? We mix blood, become family by choice, not birth. Share a sacred prayer to the Creator. Among my people, blood brothers are closer than those born of the same mother. Mason extended his hand, palm up. If we're going to fight Bishop together, might as well make it official. Tahi drew her knife across his palm, the blade sharp enough that pain followed the cut rather than accompanied it. She did the same to her own hand. Their blood mingled as they clasped hands. By Apache law, we are now of one family, she said, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality as she spoke words in her native tongue. Your enemies are mine, mine are yours. One blood, one breath, one path until the stars fall from the sky. Dawn brought clarity and purpose. Their destination was clear, the Apache village in the high mesas, a 2-day journey by wagon. The village nestled in a hidden valley, protected by towering cliffs on 3 sides. As they approached, warriors emerged from the rocks, rifles aimed at the wagon. Chief Nantai, a towering man with penetrating eyes and a face lined by sun and struggle, greeted them with open suspicion that turned to shock when he saw his daughter. Tahe, he said, embracing her briefly. Then his eyes hardened at Mason. Why do you bring a white man here? And Burke, the one-armed soldier who once hunted us? Tahe explained rapidly in Apache, showing her scarred palm. The chief's expression shifted between disbelief and reluctant acceptance. Blood brother or not, Nantai said to Mason, his English heavily accented but clear. Bishop comes with many guns. Why should we trust you? Because I've seen what men like Bishop do, Mason replied, meeting the chief's gaze. I've been the man who followed orders without questioning. I've burned villages and told myself it was necessary. Not anymore. Nantai considered this, eyes narrowing. The weapons cache? Tahe nodded. We must arm our warriors, father. It is time. The sacred cave lay hidden behind a waterfall, its entrance concealed by generations of careful stonework. Tahe led them through a narrow passage that twisted deep into the mountain. At its end stood an ancient door carved with symbols Mason didn't recognize. Tahe pressed her bloodied palm to the center of the door, speaking words in an old dialect even Nantai seemed to struggle to understand. The door swung open, revealing a chamber that took Mason's breath away. Racks of rifles, Winchesters, Springfields, Sharps stood in precise rows. Crates of ammunition, pistols, even cavalry sabers lined the walls. And in the center, gleaming in the torchlight, stood a Gatling gun on its wheeled mount. Taken in raids over many years, Nantai explained, seeing Mason's expression. For the day when we would need to defend ourselves one final time. Mason examined the weapons, checking mechanisms, counting ammunition. Not enough men to use all these, he noted. We will train quickly, Nantai replied. For 2 days, Mason drilled the Apache warriors in military tactics, flanking maneuvers, coordinated fire, defensive positions. Burke, despite his wound, supervised the construction of barriers and foxholes at strategic points around the village. Mason worked closely with 10 warriors who showed particular aptitude, teaching them to use the Gatling gun. 600 rounds per minute, he explained as they practiced turning the crank. Aim for the center of their line, then sweep left to right. On the 3rd morning, scouts reported Bishop's force approaching, 40 riders, heavily armed, with supply wagons suggesting a prolonged campaign. He's brought more men than we expected, Burke said grimly, studying the valley through a spyglass. Mason positioned the Gatling gun on the ridge overlooking the main approach. 20 warriors with rifles took covered positions along the slopes. The remaining Apache, women, children, elders, retreated to caves higher in the mountains. The plan was simple but effective. Allow Bishop's men to enter the narrow valley, then cut off retreat while the Gatling gun decimated their center. If executed properly, it would end the threat in minutes. Bishop's men appeared at midday, advancing cautiously through the narrow pass. Mason waited until they reached the widest point, then signaled. The first volley dropped 7 of Bishop's men immediately. The rest scattered for cover as the Gatling gun opened fire, its terrible mechanical chattering echoing off the canyon walls. But Bishop was no fool. He quickly identified the Gatling's position and concentrated fire there, forcing Mason and his Apache gunners to retreat. The battle devolved into a deadly game of hide-and-seek among the rocks, with snipers on both sides picking off exposed targets. By sunset, both sides had taken losses. Burke took a bullet to the leg but continued directing fire from behind a boulder. 5 Apache warriors lay dead, along with at least 15 of Bishop's men. As darkness fell, Mason spotted movement along the eastern ridge. Bishop was sending men to flank their position and reach the caves where the women and children sheltered. "They're going around us," he told Nantai. "If they reach the upper caves—" The chief nodded grimly. "Go. Take 5 warriors. Stop them." Mason led the small group through hidden trails known only to the Apache, circling behind Bishop's flanking force, 8 men moving silently through the darkness. They struck from behind, silent and deadly. In the confusion, Bishop's men fired on each other before Mason's group melted back into the darkness. Dawn brought an eerie silence. Bishop had pulled his remaining men back beyond rifle range. "What's he waiting for?" Burke wondered, his face gray with pain as Tahi changed his bandages. Mason studied the distant figures through his scope. Reinforcements, or a new plan? The answer came at midday, a wagon loaded with dynamite. Bishop meant to blast his way through their defenses, clearing a path to the village. "Get everyone back to the upper caves," Mason ordered. "I'll deal with this." "How?" Ty demanded. Mason checked his rifle. "By ending it with Bishop. This is between him and me now." Before she could object, he was gone, moving through the rocks to a position overlooking Bishop's camp. Through his scope, he spotted Bishop directing men loading the dynamite wagon. 1 shot. That's all he needed. Mason steadied his breathing, adjusted for wind, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the canyon. Bishop jerked, clutched his shoulder, but remained standing. He looked directly toward Mason's position and smiled. "Reed!" Bishop shouted. "I knew it was you. Come down and face me." Mason considered his options. He could retreat, but Bishop would simply continue his assault on the village. This needed to end. He descended carefully, rifle ready, until he stood on the canyon floor 50 yards from Bishop. 4 men flanked the lieutenant, guns trained on Mason. "Didn't expect to see you fighting for savages," Bishop called, pressing a bandana to his bleeding shoulder. "Better than fighting for gold miners," Mason replied. "How much are they paying you to massacre women and children?" Bishop's smile didn't reach his eyes. "More than you'd believe. But this isn't just business." He stepped forward. "Did you know it was me, Mason? 5 years ago? Your wife and son?" Mason froze. "What did you say?" "Mining company wanted your land. You wouldn't sell. Tragic how fever can take a family so quickly." Bishop's smile widened. "Amazing what a few dollars can buy, including the blankets from a smallpox hospital." White-hot rage filled Mason's vision. His rifle came up, but Bishop's men were faster. A shot rang out and pain exploded in Mason's leg. He fell to one knee, still aiming. "Shoot him," Bishop ordered. Gunfire erupted, but not from Bishop's men. From the ridge above, Tahi fired Mason's Winchester, dropping 2 men. Nantai and a dozen warriors appeared on the surrounding cliffs, rifles aimed. Mason dragged himself behind a boulder as bullets ricocheted around him. Tahi appeared beside him moments later. "I told you," she said, reloading the Winchester. "Your enemies are mine." Bishop's voice carried from behind an overturned wagon. "The dynamite's still here, Reed. You and your Apache whore will die together." Mason checked his Colt. 2 bullets left. Not enough. Tahi pressed something into his hand. A small clay pot. "Fire medicine," she whispered. "Throw it at the wagon." Mason understood. With his remaining strength, he hurled the pot toward the dynamite wagon. It shattered against the wood. Flames erupted instantly, racing toward the explosives. Bishop screamed, realizing too late what was happening. The explosion shook the canyon, sending rocks and debris flying. When the dust settled, Mason limped toward the remains of the wagon, Tahi supporting him. Bishop lay pinned beneath a wagon wheel, blood pooling beneath him. "You know what the Apache do to enemies?" Mason asked, standing over him. Fear flickered in Bishop's eyes. "Mason, we're soldiers. We follow orders." "I stopped following orders a long time ago." Mason raised his Colt. "This is for my wife, my son, and every Apache you would have murdered." The shot echoed through the canyon. The army arrived 3 days later, a full cavalry company investigating reports of fighting. They found an uneasy peace. Chief Nantai presented documents showing legal claim to their lands, signed by the territorial governor years earlier. The weapons cache remained hidden. Major Ellis, commanding the cavalry, was clearly unhappy, but had no grounds to act. Bishop wasn't operating under army orders, he admitted reluctantly, but this territory is still under U.S. jurisdiction. "We understand jurisdiction," Nantai replied. "We also understand the difference between law and justice." The cavalry withdrew, leaving Mason with a choice. Burke offered him partnership at the trading post. Nantai extended invitation to remain with the tribe as a blood brother. Both represented a chance to belong again. Mason chose neither and both. He built a new cabin on the boundary between Apache land and the settlement, becoming an intermediary between 2 worlds. Tahi visited often, teaching him the Apache language and traditions. Sometimes she brought her father or other tribal elders. Sometimes Burke joined them, bringing news from the settlements. One evening, as Mason sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the mesas gold and crimson, Tahi appeared on the trail. "The miners have not returned," she said, settling beside him. "They won't," Mason replied. "Not with Bishop gone and the army watching." "And you? Will you stay on this boundary forever? Neither Apache nor white man?" Mason considered the question. "I'm where I need to be, not running from the past anymore." Tahi nodded, understanding. "The blood law does not demand you choose one world or the other, only that you honor your bond." As darkness fell over the Arizona territory, Mason felt something he'd thought lost forever: purpose. Not in war or revenge, but in building something new on the frontier between 2 worlds. "Some laws," he said quietly, "are worth following." In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that carried across the valley. But Mason Reed was no longer alone.